I came here expecting scenery. I was not prepared for how people lived their everyday lives. Before moving, Australia existed in my mind as a postcard. Beaches, wildlife, sunshine, open land. That was the image repeated everywhere online, in travel blogs, in social media feeds, in conversations with people who had visited for a week or two. When I arrived, the scenery delivered exactly what I expected. The coastlines were real, the light was real, the space was real. What caught me off guard was everything happening away from the coast. Suburban streets felt calm but active. Cafes were full, yet quiet. Public spaces felt shared without tension. Nobody seemed to be performing enjoyment. People were simply moving through their day without urgency or friction. The country was not defined by sand and water alone. It was defined by how people moved through ordinary moments. Morning routines, afternoon errands, evening walks. None of it looked dramatic from the outside, but all of it carried a texture I had not anticipated. I realized quickly that the postcard version of Australia had only shown me the surface. The version that actually mattered was the one unfolding on ordinary streets, in ordinary hours, between ordinary people living without any awareness that someone new was watching and quietly reconsidering everything. Tourism shows beauty. Living shows rhythm. In the United States, daily life often feels compressed and fast. There is an underlying current of urgency that runs through most interactions. Even casual conversations can carry a sense of efficiency, as if time spent without clear output is time wasted. In Australia, rhythm felt different from the first week. It felt steady rather than slow. People were not rushing to prove urgency. Conversations stretched without pressure. Meetings ended without the sense that someone needed to be somewhere more important. Even errands felt slower without ever feeling lazy or careless. That difference challenged one of my deepest assumptions about productivity. I had always connected output with pace. If things moved quickly, progress was happening. If they moved slowly, something was wrong. Australia dismantled that equation quietly and without argument. Life flowed here without feeling delayed or behind. Deadlines existed, work happened, responsibilities were met, but none of it required the same internal pressure I had carried for years without questioning. That rhythm was not a cultural accident. It felt deliberate, or at least deeply ingrained, and adjusting to it did not feel like lowering expectations. It felt like releasing a tension I had not realized I was holding. That release, more than any landscape, was the first sign that something about this place was genuinely different. The biggest surprise was how predictable daily behavior felt and how much comfort that predictability created. Neighbors greeted without forcing conversation. A nod, a brief word, a small acknowledgement that someone else existed in the same space. Nothing performative, nothing that required a response beyond a simple nod in return. Strangers respected personal space without coldness. There was no hostility in the distance. It simply felt like an unspoken agreement about how public space worked. Public transit operated without chaos. Buses arrived, people boarded in loose order, nobody argued about the process. None of these moments were dramatic individually. That is exactly what made them powerful collectively. When behavior is consistent across different people and different settings, it stops feeling like individual choice and starts feeling like shared understanding. Stability shaped the environment more than any postcard scenery ever could. I began realizing that Australia's identity did not live in its landscapes, as striking as those landscapes genuinely are. It lived in behavior, in the small, repeated actions that defined how people treated each other and treated shared space. A country reveals itself not in its most photographed locations, but in its most ordinary interactions. Those interactions, once I started paying attention to them, told me more about where I had moved than any travel guide or tourism campaign ever managed to communicate. That was the education I had not expected to receive. I expected beaches to define my experience of living in Australia. Every piece of content I had consumed before arriving pointed in that direction. The water, the coastline, the outdoor lifestyle built around proximity to the ocean. Instead, sidewalks defined my experience. Grocery stores defined it. Local cafes defined it. The pharmacy on a quiet Tuesday afternoon defined it more than any famous bay or national park. The normal spaces revealed more about Australia than any celebrated coastline could, because normal spaces are where actual life happens. They are where you see how people treat service workers, how they respond to minor inconveniences, how they navigate crowded aisles without turning frustration into confrontation. When everyday life feels calm and balanced, beauty becomes background rather than focus. You stop chasing landmarks and start noticing the quality of the ordinary. That shift changed how I understood what makes a place genuinely meaningful versus simply visually impressive. A place can be stunning and exhausting at the same time. A place can be quietly beautiful and deeply livable without ever appearing on a travel list. Australia had both qualities, but the second one was the one that changed how I thought about where I wanted to be and what I actually needed from the environment around me. That realization arrived not at sunrise on a famous beach, but in a cafe on a street with no particular significance whatsoever. Once the tourist layer faded, something else emerged underneath it. That layer fades faster than most people expect. The newness wears off. The landmarks become familiar. The excitement of arrival settles into the reality of daily routine. And it is in that routine where a place either holds up or begins to feel disappointing. Australia held up. I began noticing how people interacted without defensiveness. Small disagreements did not escalate into larger confrontations. A wrong order at a cafe was corrected without drama. A scheduling conflict was resolved without blame shifting. Silence between people did not feel uncomfortable or loaded with unspoken tension. It simply felt like silence, neutral and unremarkable. Community felt practical rather than loud or performative. People helped because situations called for it, not because an audience was watching. The beach may attract visitors and generate the images that appear in promotional material, but daily behavior shapes the people who actually live somewhere over months and years. That realization drew a clear line in my mind between vacation and reality. I had visited places that looked extraordinary in photographs and felt hollow once the novelty passed. Australia reversed that pattern. The surface looked impressive. The interior, once I accessed it, felt more impressive still. That reversal was not something I had anticipated, and it became the most honest thing the country taught me about itself. Living here exposed how narrow my original expectations had been, not in an embarrassing way, but in a clarifying one. I had arrived assuming that scenery defined culture, that what a place looked like determined what it felt like to exist inside it. Australia corrected that assumption without making the correction feel dramatic. Culture defined how scenery was experienced, not the other way around. A beach feels genuinely different when the society surrounding it operates with a degree of calm. The same stretch of sand in a high-pressure environment carries a different emotional weight than that same stretch of sand in one where people feel less urgency to perform or compete. An open sky feels wider when daily life carries less internal pressure. These are not poetic observations, they are practical ones. The physical environment did not change. What changed was the internal state I carried through it. And that internal state was shaped not by landscape, but by the accumulated effect of how people around me behaved on ordinary days. Environment and behavior work together in ways that tourism obscures. You cannot fully understand a place by visiting its most beautiful locations. You understand it by living inside its most routine moments and noticing what those moments ask of you and what they allow you to release. Australia asked less of me in certain ways. That asking less, counterintuitively, gave me more clarity than I had found in years of moving faster.
Australia is beautiful. That part is completely true and worth saying plainly. The landscapes are real. The light is real. The physical environment delivers on what the images promise. But beauty is surface level in the sense that it is the first thing you see and often the first thing you stop seeing once it becomes familiar. What changed me was not the view, it was the rhythm of normal life, encountered on unremarkable days, in unremarkable places, doing unremarkable things. Once I experienced that rhythm consistently, I stopped seeing Australia as a destination in the way that word usually functions. A destination is somewhere you go to experience something outside your ordinary life. Once a place becomes your ordinary life, something else takes over. I started seeing Australia as a system of habits and shared expectations that quietly shape how you feel each day, often without announcing themselves or asking for acknowledgement. The mornings felt different. The evenings carried less weight. The space between tasks felt usable rather than wasteful. None of that came from scenery. It came from being surrounded by a collective rhythm that had settled into something stable long before I arrived. I simply moved into it and gradually adjusted. That difference between destination and daily system matters more than any coastline or landmark ever could. It is also the thing that photographs cannot capture and that no travel content ever fully communicates. You have to live it before it becomes real.